Oh, crap. This has film in it, so I just took a picture accidentally, but, oh well. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today is the first video in the Basics of Film series. I have been planning this series for months. Since the start of my channel, I've been wanting to do this and I can't wait to share this first part of it with you. So this series, I'll briefly talk about it. It will cover the basics of film and the basics of photography. So today's video will be the basics of photography, which we will be covering aperture, shutter, ISO, and more. And in future videos, we'll be talking more about the camera, film types, developing, and presentation up to editing and post-production of your photos. So without further ado, let's get right into today's video where we will be talking about ISO, which is very important when it comes to film and film photography, aperture, and shutter. So firstly, I want to talk about ISO. So right here, I have my Ricoh KR10 Super with a ProMaster simple zoom lens. ISO is very, very important when it comes to film photography, if I can get it to focus. This is the ISO dial on my film camera. It does vary based on what film camera you have. My other film camera is a Olympus OM10, and the ISO settings are right here. So very different style of camera, but similar mechanics. So on this camera, this is the camera I use a lot of the time because it just has more settings. These are the ISOs right here, which you can set by lifting this and turning it to setting your ISO. So usually usually film speeds come in 200 and 400 ISO, so that's what you'll usually be setting it to. So when you're first starting out film photography, you're going to need film. And film comes in varying film speeds. And what that means is how sensitive the film is to light. That sensitivity will be given to you with a number. So for example, I shoot a lot of Fuji Xperia 200, which I have laying around here somewhere. That 200 stands for the ISO. You might also see 400 speed, 800 speed, up to some films even come in 3200 speed or 100 speed, and these are just the sensitivities to light. So you can kind of experiment with what speed you shoot film at, but if you're starting out in the world of film photography, I would recommend setting the ISO to the speed listed on the film. So a little bit about ISO. It's very important in photography because it's all about how your camera will register the light. So if you have a lower ISO number, usually the lowest ISO number you'll see is about 100 in common films. This means that the film is less sensitive to light than most other films. So this means it's going to take a lot more light for you to get a well-exposed, even shot. Now, if you're using an ISO, say 3200 or more commonly 400 and 800, these films are more sensitive to light. So it will take less light to get an even exposure and to get a good exposed photo. So you can't just change it based on what you want. You have to kind of stick to the speed that the film gives you. I'm so parched. Got a little iced coffee here, so sorry, I'm just gonna take a sip. Okay, now I can speak. So that's kind of the basics of ISO. You can fidget a little more with it once you get a little more experience with film photography, but if you're starting out, I definitely stick with what the film says. So moving on to the next portion of our intro to photography part of this video, we will be talking about aperture. So real quick, I'm just going to take off my lens to show you guys what aperture is. So aperture usually is shown on your lens of the camera, and it's this range of numbers, usually from 1.8 to 16 or 22, depending on the camera. This camera goes from 2.8, but my Olympus starts at 1.8. And this one goes up to 22, while my other Olympus goes up to 16. So the aperture is a mechanism within the camera lens that will control how much light is let into the camera body. So I'll see if I can show you guys. Yeah, okay. So you can kind of see it right here in the lens. As I move the dial, that hole closes up. So see, that's as open as it can get, and then it closes to that. And that just regulates how much light comes into your film camera. So let's see if I can get a better angle here. If you can see, it's like a lot of, get the light. There we go. It's a lot of little flaps in there that open to let in more light or close to let in less light. So usually when you're thinking about aperture, a smaller aperture number means a bigger hole. So the smaller the aperture number, the more light is let into your camera, while the higher aperture number, less light is let into your camera. So if you're shooting at night on a really cloudy day, you'd usually use a lower number like 2.8 or 4 to let in enough light that your camera gets an even exposure. While if you go out on a really sunny, bright day, you'll be shooting in like 22 or 16. If you've done other photography, you know the saying sunny 16. It just means if you don't have a light meter, you usually want to set your exposure or your aperture to 16 on a sunny day. Just a quick tip, the lower aperture numbers will give you a creamier, deeper, shallow depth of field. So if you've seen a photo with this kind of blurred out background or foreground, and it's very aesthetically pleasing, this is called a shallow depth of field. And you can get this most abundantly using a smaller aperture number. So if you're going after that depth of field, use a smaller aperture number like 2.8 or 4, and if you want everything to kind of be in focus, I'd go a larger aperture number. And so that kind of dictates how much of the image will be in focus, as well as the light let into your camera. So I'm just going to leave this lens off for now because we're kind of done talking about it and just show you the camera. The last basics of photography setting you'll need to know is the shutter, and this is arguably one of the most important parts of taking a photo. So the shutter I have currently set to is 125. Don't worry, I don't have any film in my camera, so I just cocked the camera for the next photo, and if I hit the shutter button, you'll see that this mirror flips up and sets back down. So shutter is all about how quickly and how long this mirror stays up. So behind this mirror will be where your film rests. So when that mirror flips up, the light will expose your film for however long that mirror stays up, and that's your shutter. So if I set it to 1, this is 1/1, so this would be a 1-second shutter, and I cock it and hit the button. It stays open for 1 second before closing back down. Well, if I set it to the highest it can go, which is 1,000 on my camera, it opens very quickly and slams back down. So this is very important to get the right amount of light into your camera, just like aperture. These two will be things that you can easily control within your camera so you can get the light meter to the point where it says, this will be a good shot. So I'd recommend kind of setting the aperture you want and then messing with the shutter, or if shutter's more important to you, you can mess around with that and then set your aperture accordingly. Now, some of the effects you can get with a shutter is if you use a nice low shutter speed, like usually less than 60, or even down to bulb. That's a very, very slow shutter speed. So what your camera sees will usually be very blurred, especially if you're holding it. So that can be an effect, or it can be a downside. So if you want a fairly sharp image when you're holding it, I would suggest going with a 125 shutter speed. And so the basic rule is anything 60 or less when you're taking a picture, just holding it, just holding the camera with your hands, it'll probably be a little blurry. So if you want to take good photos without a tripod, I'd usually suggest 125 or higher on your camera. Now, if you're taking pictures of moving subjects, like a runner or a bird flying through the air, you really want to capture that moment and not have it blurry. So I'd recommend shutter speeds above or right at 500. So usually if I'm taking a photo of something fast moving, I'll set it to 500 or 1000 and then see what my camera says about where the light is and how much light I need, and I'll set my aperture accordingly. Now if I want that depth of field and I'm not so worried about shutter, I'll set my aperture where I need it and then I'll adjust the shutter until I get to the point where I can take a well-exposed photo. So those are kind of the basics of the camera mechanics and light. So now just talking a little bit about the camera itself. So usually on a film camera, you will have a winding lever here. What this will do, it will advance your film. So if I open up the back of my camera, which another point to talk about, usually on film cameras, you pop up this the rewind lever and then this pops open. So your film will be inserted here and you'll just your photo. This will turn and it will advance your film one more slide. And then when you take a photo, it depends on what type of camera you have, but the shutter will be back here and it will open up to light. Now sometimes if you get a new film camera, the shutter won't always work, so you should always test that before you get a film camera, especially if it's somewhere from like a thrift store or otherwise. Now I can't necessarily show you the light meter in my camera, but I can tell you what I see. So when I'm taking a photo and my camera's on, I will have a list of shutter speeds. So if I'm doing aperture priority, which is this A, or shutter priority, which is this, no, aperture priority, oh my goodness, I promise I know my stuff. If I'm on aperture priority, it means that I can change the aperture as much as I want, and the camera will set the shutter speed for you for a nice, well-balanced picture. Now, if I'm doing manual, and I want to control both aperture and shutter, I'll just set it to my shutter speed. And in my camera, I'll have an arrow that's pointing up and an arrow that's pointing down. And if it's flashing down, it means it's going to be underexposed, and if it's flashing up, it'll be overexposed. So I'm looking for that point where neither of the arrows are flashing, and then I can just take my photo and it'll come out nice and exposed perfectly. So this camera is really nice. It can do full manual. It can also do aperture priority, so that's very, very helpful. It has a nice range of ISO values, spot for the flash, hefty rewind, and nice feeling shutter. Now, talking briefly about my other camera, this camera cannot do full manual. The rewind lever is right here, and it's nice. I really like it because it's my only camera with a 50mm lens. Oh, crap. This has film in it, so I just took a picture accidentally, but, oh well. Yeah, I was about to open the back of this up, so that is good that I did not. So yeah, this is my Olympus OM10, very nice 50mm lens, great for taking portraits, and it's a great overall camera. The only thing is it can't do manual, but when I'm doing portraits, I usually stick with what the camera tells me, so it's not that big of a problem anyways. So this was the basics of film photography first video where we talked about things like ISO, aperture, and shutter. I hope you enjoyed today's video and you found it informative. Next video we will be talking about a little more about the camera itself, some more about film types and various films that you can get, and I will be showing you how to load film into your camera, which is super important. I will see you guys next time. Bye.